Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahla wa sahlan. Welcome, guys, to our podcast. Hope you guys are well. Inshallah, Brother Altaf and Brother Naveed will be joining shortly, inshallah ta'ala. Ahla wa sahlan. Hadiqa wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, today we have a fantastic podcast today. As usual, all our podcasts are fantastic, inshallah ta'ala. But today is going to be special because today is going to be about history, and we have, inshallah, tonight we have our wonderful guest, Brother Hassan Munir, inshallah, who will be joining us, and we're going to be talking about history. Now, history, I think it's a very, very important. I personally think, and I've got a lot of questions, inshallah, for Brother Hassan, because I like history, and I'm not too well read up in history, so I can't really kind of speak too much about it. I mean, I can make stuff up, yeah. I think that's the best I can do, and you guys will probably believe me anyway about all the stuff that I mentioned about history. But inshallah, we're gonna have a qualified person, inshallah, talk about history, and also, I mean, it's very important as Muslims to learn from the mistakes of the past, I think. So sometimes what tends to happen is we kind of live in a bubble, and we kind of think to ourselves, the life we're living is an unprecedented life, and no one else experienced this, and and we kind of like sometimes kind of, I think we think ourselves to be very exclusive to how we are living as Muslims. And in the reality, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tested people in different times, in different ways. And through history we kind of learn more about ourselves as well. So inshallah, we're going to be inviting brother on in just in a few minutes. But before that, if you guys do have any questions regarding history, then post them, inshallah, and whichever ones, inshallah, Brother Hassan can answer, inshallah, he'll try to answer, inshallah. And yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. And today I've got my blue tea as well, guys. Yeah, it's a nice blue tea. Altaf and Naveed, if you guys are watching, if you guys are listening, well, Naveed has actually, Naveed's come, mashallah, Naveed's here. So inshallah, Naveed will be joining us. Wa alaikum assalam, Naveed, you are live on the podcast.
Mashallah.
Yes, already.
I'm just walking home, Mufti Saab. I've had a bit of a late one, so I just literally finished the office. I'm going to be home in literally 5 minutes, and I'll join with video, inshallah.
Excellent.
How are you keeping anyway, Mufti Saab?
Yeah, excellent, mashallah. Everyone's anticipating, waiting, because they missed you for that 1 week. They can't wait to see you. What kind of camera are you going to come on today?
Every week is something different. We had some guests from out of town today, Sheikh. We had somebody from Derby come down, and then we had the brother from Islam 21C were here. So Dr. Salman, he popped down. So we're a little bit tied up with that. It just took a bit longer than expected. How's your week been, Mufti Saab?
Excellent, mashallah. Alhamdulillah.
I'm
gonna bring on you. Get home, inshallah, because the way that you're breathing, either you're dying of an asthma attack, or
it's raining, and I'm walking, pacing. I'm walking really fast.
Alhamdulillah.
I'll see you shortly then, inshallah.
So, mashallah, our brother Altaf has joined us today as well. Alhamdulillah. Altaf, how are you, Altaf?
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum, guys. Alhamdulillah, not too bad, Mufti Saab. Just a little bit jaded. Not tired, jaded.
Is it that kind of like winter anticipation, happy?
Oh, I can't. It feels like
Christmas
Xmas started, man. Started like Christmas has started. I don't know, Muslims, man. We get a bit tied up with this stuff, man. Mufti Saab, I got something to show everybody. I'm going to show you in 1 second. Give me a second. Let me show you something.
Allah, we can't wait, man. We can't wait. So Altaf is keeping us. He's keeping our suspense.
I'm just getting.
What can this possibly be? We can hear the sounds of it, but we can't see it. So, any ideas? MashaAllah, we have Abu Safura is on as well. Alaikum assalam, ahla wa sahlan. MashaAllah, Hadiqa is very excited for this episode, and I'm very excited as well. Inshallah. Altaf, go on. What do you have? PS5. Astaghfirullah. That's a chicken on steroids.
Musab, look, holding it like a child.
The turkey. So
I got a question for you, Mufti Saab.
Well, as long as it's related to history, because tonight's podcast is about history. Inshallah, we're going to bring Brother Hassan.
Historically, is it wrong to eat turkey on Christmas Day?
We'll leave that one to Brother Hassan, inshallah. He's going to answer this one in his own way, inshallah.
Inshallah, Musab.
All right, so we're going to bring our Brother Hassan now, mashallah. Ahlan wa sahlan, ahlan wa sahlan. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Hassan.
Wa alaikum salam, Mufti Saab and Brother Altaf. Jazakallah khairan for having me. I'm really enjoying the conversation so far about turkeys and beauty and God knows what else goes on in the UK.
We're joined by our friend today. I think we'll just hold him here for the rest of the day. I'm joking. I'm gonna put
When they had the American Thanksgiving, I did a post on Instagram on the Islamic history of Turkey, and why it's called Turkey, and all of these things. So there's a lot of interesting connections.
I'm gonna go search for your post.
Okay, so is it true then that the country Turkey was called Turkey because of the turkey, or is it?
No. They it's literally the word Turki, right? Describing like of the Turks, association with the Turks, that the modern day country of Turkey got its name. But Europeans, the Turkey is indigenous to the Americas. Right. So after the Columbian exchange happened, after Christopher Columbus came over and he found the turkey and he took it back, Europeans were a bit confused about where this new kind of bird and this meat was coming from. And they thought it was coming from the Ottoman Empire. So they called it Turkey. Right. And funnily enough, my favorite fact about Turkey is that in India, which is Al-Hind, they call Turkey Turki. And in Turkey, which is Turkey, they call the turkey, the animal, Al-Hindi, like the Indian. Right? So they call it by each other's name because they're not sure like where exactly it came from.
Okay, that's a good one. It's like, I think it's like, when you kind of go to kind of like China and you say they're gonna eat Chinese food. It's like for them, it's like normal food.
Exactly.
Alhamdulillah. So, Brother Hassan, this is actually the first time we have met face to face. Alhamdulillah, mashallah. Tell us a little bit about your sort of interest in history, a bit about yourself.
Sure. So, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be in this conversation. I am based in Toronto, Canada. I've lived here most of my life. I'm currently doing my master's degree in Middle Eastern history at the University of Toronto. I work with Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. I'm a public relations manager and a research fellow there. So I've done some research for them, basically on dismantling Islamophobic narratives, especially those that are related to history or misconceptions about history. And I do a lot of my own independent research work, especially on the gaps in Islamic history. So what are the aspects of Islamic history or the history of Muslim experiences that we generally don't get to see? So local communities, things like I just mentioned, like the Islamic history of Turkey, right? This kind of broadening what we think of when we think of Islamic history. I think in the general perception, there's certain moments, right? Like people generally know, of course, the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then the Khulafa Rashidun, and then people know a bit about the Golden Age, the Abbasids, etc. And then there's a huge jump to Salahuddin Ayyubi rahimahullah, right? And then from there, there's another huge jump generally to the Ottomans, and then the Ottomans bring us up to the modern period. But that's although that's a good place to start, alhamdulillah, there's an outline there, but there are so many gaps, as well as in our local and more immediate history, like what's the history of Muslims in Canada, or what's the history of Muslims in the UK, like more recent histories. And a lot of my work is focused on making sure that we start to broaden our horizons when we think about history, so that we also broaden our scope of the lessons that we can learn from studying history. So that's in a nutshell, that's the kind of work I do.
MashaAllah. Interesting. So, I personally, Brother Hassan, I studied in madrasa, like I've studied in Pakistan. And one of the things that I keep on hearing is the issue with regards to Okay, I do apologize, Hassan. Do you have earphones?
Wait, is there an echo? Is that the
Yeah,
reason?
there's a slight echo that I think is coming
Okay,
through.
I can. I don't have earphones, but what I can do, I can decrease the volume a bit here. Hopefully that helps.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So what I was saying is, one of the biggest sort of like problems that I saw in the madrasa syllabus, which may not be the case in every madrasa, but in a lot of madrasas, where there's no sort of like syllabus that focuses on history apart from the books of Sirah. And I don't know. What I've started to sense is that the lack of sort of focus on history has resulted in sort of like history being or certain things that happen historically being romanticized. So I don't know exactly to what extent. I mean, your experience is in that area, but to me it seems as though, especially when it comes to fatwa, for example, like when it comes to fatwa or when it comes to answers of scholars, we tend to find that certain scholars were sort of like giving a fatwa, but because we can't see what the political situation was at that time, or you know whatever the circumstances of that particular country were, social circumstances, the fatwa may have been tailored for a specific, looking at a specific sort of like situation, and then later on, people not seeing that situation and then giving a fatwa, which was you know I don't know. I mean, does that make sense? So
Uh,
what have you found in this?
Certainly, history tends to be romanticized because it's such a vast subject, right? Like it's essentially an endless subject. And by the way, it's not just in the Muslim community or in Muslim institutions of education. This is a challenge across the board, where history is always essentialized. People always try to summarize it in different ways. They try to, get to the point because they know their audiences have only a certain amount of time and energy to invest into studying the subject. And then the person who's writing a textbook or the person who's developing a curriculum, whether it's in the public school or a madrasa or wherever it may be, they have to make a choice, right? And oftentimes the people who are making the choices aren't necessarily trained or professional historians, right? Or they have certain priorities. Despite the best of intentions, sometimes I'm not trying to imply that people don't try their absolute best to give a true representation of history, but it's just an extremely difficult thing to do, to kind of summarize and condense history in a way that you can unpack all the relevant and useful lessons, and the context, like you mentioned, for example, with the fatawa, right? And what context were they actually issued in? But it's a very difficult thing to do. And the fatawa issue, it actually reminds me of a good example, which I learned earlier this year, that the name skips my mind at the moment, but in North Africa, in the Maghrib, there was a faqih, basically, I believe in the 15th century of CE, of the Common Era, and he had to issue or he had to clarify an issue, which was basically that people, instead of "Assalamu alaikum," peace be upon you, they would say, "How are you?" Like, they would, in the local sort of Berber language. And the idea was that, where did this come from? And it actually came from the plague of Amwas during the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, which I'm sure many of us have heard of this year, which was an epidemic, right? And the famous lessons that we learned from it about quarantine and all of these kinds of things. But during the plague, when you say "Assalamu alaikum," you don't learn whether or not the person is actually doing well, right? It's not a question. "Assalamu alaikum" isn't a question.
Walaikum
So during the
assalam.
plague of Was, what people had started doing in Syria was they had started asking each other, instead of saying salam, they would be like, "How are you?" Like, I need some information here. Like, if you're sneezing or coughing or something's happening, let's keep a distance. So that became a tradition that somehow found its way into like 15th century North Africa. And this faqih had to clarify that for that particular context, it may have been okay to do that, just because people were so concerned and it was such a devastating situation. People were asking each other, sometimes even foregoing salam and asking each other, "How are you doing?" He's like, that doesn't mean you take that and you just replace salam with "How are you?" anywhere, right? In any situation, anywhere. So that's just like one small example. And there's many, many countless other examples. I'm sure you yourself in your studies and your research have encountered many of them. But history in that sense is definitely, it gets romanticized and decontextualized. But there's no real way around this. The only way around this is for us to try to do our absolute best to have a systematic way of educating ourselves and our communities about history, and making sure that when we're making choices, when it comes to that moment when we choose what is important, what are we going to teach in our madaris, what are we going to teach in our schools, etc., that it's not just a certain category of people who are making those decisions. We need imams there. We need trained scholars from the traditional approach of the Islamic disciplines to history. We need professional historians who understand sort of the modern day discipline and sensitivities of it. We need all of those people to come together and make decisions. And this needs to be a priority, because I think we often underestimate how far this romanticization goes in terms of developing misleading narratives, including narratives that become the basis of things like very serious issues, like, misrepresentations of history are behind things like the Quebec City mosque shooting that we had here in Canada, like the Christchurch mosque shooting that occurred in New Zealand. Like, it can get very serious. It's not just like a little bit of an issue. So this is something that's definitely something we need to work on as communities.
Interesting. Okay, so I've got a question. You know Kawali, yeah?
Yeah.
Where did Kawali come from?
I saw your YouTube video, actually. I think I saw one of your videos on that question. I think it was posted pretty recently.
Shall I tell you why I asking this question? When I first joined Madrasa, yeah, I joined in Ramadan, or just before Ramadan. So there was a guy there, yeah. This guy's, funnily enough, the guy's name was Liaquat as well. And he was in his last year, he was qualifying. Yeah, wow. Liaquat, 2 liaqats. You thought 1 liaqat was amazing. You got 2 liaqats.
I thought Kawali came from Aziz Mia.
So guess what happened one night, right? He's there after Taraweeh. He's in the room and he goes to me, quiet. I go, what? He goes, I'm listening to Kawali. So he's got this Kawali on, right, in the room, in the madrasa, in the hostel. And he's like got the radio on, basically. And in the radio at night time, like, Ramadan in Pakistan, it's like everyone's in a spiritual mode, right? And he's got this Kawali and he's listening to Kawali. I couldn't understand the Kawali. I don't know what they were saying. It just sounded like music to me.
Musab, we used to call Kawali with all my friends mumble rap. It was Urdu's mumble rap. Because nobody understands a word that's going on.
So this mumble rap here, anyway. So this guy, when he was listening to Kawali, and I was just like, what I didn't understand. I came from just like this new practicing background, Tablighi Jamaat. I just like kind of freshly came out of 40 days, and I'm thinking to myself, musical instruments and all these kind of things are haram. And I've come to a madrasa, and there's a guy there who's in his last years qualifying. He's about 2 weeks left to qualify. And this guy's listening to Kawali. So I couldn't make sense of it. Now I knew, in the back of my mind, I knew there's some religious sort of like tint to the music. So okay, so it's like a bit of, you're giving this kind of religious touch to it. But at the same time, there's the musical instruments associated to it. So it was like, it seemed in Pakistan, there was like a relaxed feeling about Kawali, rather than like Bollywood music, which was like totally no. But then Kawali was like, you can get away with it if you got it on the bus, if you're just like kind of like listening to the lyrics. Because sometimes the lyrics, now listening to the lyrics, when I used to be in the bus, I used to listen to the lyrics all the time. So the kind of stuff they used to say was like really kind of deep things. It's like very deep poetry. And, the way that they kind of saying kind of description, love for the Prophet ﷺ, or how they're going to face Allah on the Day of Judgment, or, other things like that. It's kind of like enjoyable to listen to. Obviously, the music does enhance that kind of feeling a bit. But I'm not saying, I'm not obviously saying that whether it's jaiz or not. That's a separate matter. What I'm saying is, where did this actually stem from? Where did it come from?
Yeah, certainly Kawali is a very, it has an interesting history, not something I've studied in any particular detail, but I have some familiarity with it. The first word that, the first thing that comes to mind whenever I hear of Kawali is when, when there was a difficult situation when Uthman radiallahu anhu had been martyred, and Ali radiallahu anhu was in very difficult circumstances taking the position of the Khalifa. one of the first things he said when he took that position, something he wasn't necessarily trying to take, but he was sort of thrust into that position. And of course, he was very rightfully so deserving of that position. He said, "Oh people, you need a rajulun fa'al la qawwal," right? He said, "You need a person of action, not a qawwal, not somebody who just makes noise," right? So that's something that I always think of when I hear the word qawwal. Like this is noise, right? And
That's a
maybe
good
this is a
one.
distraction from being rajulun fa'al.
Yeah.
Kawali, as far as I'm aware, it's sort of like the Persianate culture. It's not indigenously and like a Indian subcontinent kind of tradition. Comes more from the Persianate world, particularly in Central Asia, which is in many cultures around the world. There's some kind of devotion, some kind of tradition of using certain instruments and reciting poetry alongside them, right? And with the very interesting mix of cultures that existed in Central Asia, right, which was actually very rich in terms of the religious diversity. There's animism and shamanism and Manichaeanism, and there's like Eastern Christianity, and then there's Zoroastrianism, all kinds of things going on there before Islam. So many of those Turco-Mongol cultures, they developed this concept of essentially reciting poetry while using certain, not even like the very complicated instruments, but basically having some kind of background beat or something to give it a little bit of extra touch. Now, this flowed into the Indian subcontinent as those Central Asians themselves, all of the Uzbeks and the Timurids and the Afghans, etc. They all flowed into South Asia, and in South Asia, it really served as a bridge, sort of, to between like primarily the Muslims and the Hindus. So it became like a form of communication that the Hindus could actually, get along with, right? And this is part of the dangers of music as well, as the scholars tell us, from what I understand, is that it's essentially that loss of self-control, right? It's that distraction from rationally thinking about things. It drives emotion. It generates emotion, very strong emotion, right? Which is why people start dancing, and all of these things are associated with it. So essentially, that's what it was. It became a very strong form of communicating ideas about Islam, communicating sort of Islamic hate language, sort of Muslim culture to people of other faiths as well as to other Muslims. And then, as often things happen, the original history or the original purpose is lost. And this may be, I'm not sure, but this may be one of those situations where the original context is lost, but the tradition survives, and this continues and it perpetuates. And now you have, like, nowadays you have all kinds of like Kawalis, and a lot of them, like you said, are sort of, at least in terms of the lyrics, they're content that calls you towards religion or expresses some kind of religious feeling or concept. But a lot of it isn't. There's Kawalis that are just like about, love and all kinds of things out there as well. So without knowing like specifically and in too much detail the history, like that is the general trajectory that I know of Kawali. And I'll leave the fatwa to you.
Interesting. So it's more of like I think the interesting point that you raised was where something has an objective, a purpose initially, it loses that objective, and then at the end, what happens is the culture sort of remains, the tradition just carries on.
Right.
Is that something which, I don't know what Altaf and Naveed have to say about that, but is that something which you find quite common in sort of Indian subcontinent culture, where holding on to certain traditions seems to be something which is more important than keeping like, I remember we had brother Yahya on once, and one of the questions I asked him was when we look at the food that's found in India subcontinent, it's very rich in a lot of nutrients, vitamins, and also things like turmeric. But when you ask your parents or your uncles and aunties, why do you add this ingredient to the dish, they don't know. Like, they don't know the benefit of it. Rather than if you go on like MasterChef, that kind of I don't know if you're familiar with MasterChef on the TV. they'll kind of tell you the reason why they add this much and why they do this to it, and all the benefits for it. So it's like sometimes, I asked him, I said to him, is it possible that historically the Indians, they knew about the benefits of these herbs and spices that they used to add to the dishes, and that was deliberately added to achieve these sort of like internal sort of like benefits. And but later on, people forgot about this and just carried on the tradition and just kind of made things. And then, the Western man thought, well, there's benefits in turmeric and there's benefits in doing these things. So is that something? Am I right? Is that something that we find generally in the Indian culture, that they hold on to a lot of tradition and then they lose the?
I think that's culture in general, right? Not just in the Indian subcontinent, but in many other places, and I would assume in all places. Well, I haven't studied all cultures, but that tends to happen over time. The original purpose and meaning and the significance and the understanding of any aspect of culture slowly dwindles away, and then it just becomes like traditional knowledge that oftentimes people stop questioning and they stop thinking very deeply about it. Like, this is just the way things are. I mean, when we read about like a lot of the ayat about the Quraysh during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? They've taken this, whatever original meaning was in the concept of respecting your ancestors, and now it's just become like a completely blind thing where they'll justify anything in the name of we're just following what our forefathers used to do. So I think in any cultural tradition, this tends to happen. That things start to lose their meaning over time, or the meaning changes, or they gain new meaning. I think for the Western culture, like with turmeric and something, these are things that are relatively new for them. Like, still, in the grand scheme of history, like, it's a relatively new introduction, right? And so for us, it's kind of like embodied knowledge, or it's sort of knowledge that's taken for granted. Like, that's just the way things are. Like, we all know, like, it's almost like we're born with it or something like that. We all just know, like, haldi, you put some haldi in your milk and your cough will go away or something like that. But for someone, when it's transplanted into a different culture, for them it's like a relatively new introduction, and that's why they're like, oh, this is turmeric, and if you add like this many grams of it into this, like these chemical reactions will happen inside your cells, and then this and this will happen. For us, it's like, well, obviously that's just how the world works. That's just how turmeric works, right? So I think it's something that's pretty standard among all cultures, and again, something like learning to be self-critical about our cultures is extremely important in that sense. Just so not so, and people think of this the wrong way, like why would we just criticize our culture for the sake of it? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to learn to truly appreciate things. We have to constantly reevaluate what the thing is and what our relationship with it is. Right? Regardless of what it is, the clothes we wear, just be thoughtful, think deeply about everything in your life. And that makes, I think being thoughtful is at the core of being a good Muslim, really, in my understanding. So, but culturally, yeah, you will face that challenge, but things are just like there, right? And people are just like, well, this is just the way it is.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I mean, I don't know what Altaf, Naveed, do you have any sort of like historic? I've got loads of historic questions. I don't want to kind of block you guys from asking your questions. So if you have any questions, guys, this is the time.
My first question is slightly unrelated. Can anyone else hear the echo? Is it just me?
I'm sorry. I think that's on my end. It's an issue.
Yeah,
okay, never mind.
Don't worry about it.
Sorry, it wasn't a history related. Altaf, I'll let you carry on.
So you both mentioned something which is really interesting, and something that like I've come across before, but not really kind of like given too much time to. And I remember speaking to a few scholars about certain issues, and one of them was about like when you were talking about fatwa that were written historically, about how the context of those fatwas is you have to glean that separately. And I just thought that was quite interesting, because obviously every climate has its own circumstances and situations. Could you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think that was quite interesting for me, especially like when, some people see it as precedent, especially within the UK, like there's certain communities, certain conservative corners that will see all fatwas as precedent, as opposed to it being like, a guide So I've always find that interesting. Not that I have like any in-depth knowledge about these things. I just find it interesting that that comes up, and when you're trying to locate some of this stuff when it comes to our own understanding, that becomes important. And the second one is about Turkey, and
Cut
just
down
why
on Turkey, bro. Like, just
no,
because you
mind
got a
you. I'm
turkey
winding
here.
up. It's not Turkey. It's not Turkey. Never. I shared my turkey, my nice picture of a turkey before. It's not just about that. It's about historically when Muslims have lived in other countries, what has been their take on establishing their own culture? How long does it take? How many generations does it take for a community to establish its own culture within a country and then be Muslims from that country and have an identifiable culture? I know that's a bit more of a difficult one to kind of pinpoint a date, but just some ideas around those.
Yeah, both of those are interesting questions. I don't know too much about the first question, to be honest. Like, to me, it's kind of straightforward. I don't have too deep of a grounding in how, fatwa are produced and how the context is taken into account. So maybe Mufti Saab can, address that more thoroughly. Obviously, like to me, it's like as a layperson in that category of knowledge, it's almost like a given. Like, of course, certain fatwa, like you do look at the precedent. Like even if you look at the Western tradition, like the Western legal tradition, the court will always look at the precedent, like what similar case arose before, and how was that case dealt with. Like judges have a responsibility to take that into account. So it's kind of like a sensible thing to do. But obviously, keeping in mind that certainly every situation will have its own circumstances, will have its own context, and to keep the overall objective, like what's the objective of us issuing certain fatwa, to maintain those objectives of whatever ultimately they may be, of having a just society, having a peaceful society, peaceful coexistence, etc., etc. You can't just essentially copy paste fatwa from one place to the other without some account of the context. So maybe Mufti Saab can address that more. But as for your second question, again, it's a very complicated one. There's a lot of Muslim communities. Something I'll probably mention, actually, I think it's important to keep in mind. I often think about the fact, this is a backdrop to your question, not directly addressing it, but the Prophet ﷺ used to essentially communicate this message that Islam will spread to Syria and to Yemen. And as we know, like from the incident around the Battle of Khandaq, when they were digging the trench, and the hypocrites were kind of very amused by this situation that we can't even use the washroom, and he is promising us Syria and Yemen and this and that, right? So we happen to live at a time, like the Muslims alive right now, at a time when literally Islam has reached every land, every feasible land, really, in the world, everywhere. Like you can read about Muslims in the Philippines and Papua New Guinea and Argentina and Alaska and like Palau and Fiji and Samoa, like places people don't even hear of, but there are actual Muslim communities there. Alhamdulillah, like we have seen that realization of the vision that the Prophet ﷺ was offering 14 centuries ago. And that's what makes me think that really, if you think about it, who was more visionary ever than the Sahaba, to be in extraordinarily difficult circumstances themselves and yet to believe that yes, this will come true. And recently, like I did a bit of a project on Muslims in Alaska, like the history of Islam. The history of Islam in Antarctica, right, where people don't actually live. But I just wanted to see, like, okay, what can we find? And there's some interesting things. Like there is a Quran that's been placed there in Antarctica. The Azan was made in Antarctica. Like a lot of things have happened. Muslim researchers obviously go there, etc. But as for this question of how long it takes for a community to be established, it really, I think there's no, of course, one answer. There's so many communities in so many different places. I think it really depends on the effort that's made by subsequent generations and how early generations of migrants are able to communicate the message to the next generation of keeping the da'wah going and being sort of contributing members of society in a way that other people around them are inspired to turn around and be like, what's unique about these people? the Muslim should always stand out, right? In the best of ways. The Muslim should always be the outstanding member, not just within the Muslim community, but within the general society. And we should be turning heads. People should be thinking about our character, and people should be thinking about our behavior and saying, what makes these people so unique? Where do they get their inspiration from, right? So as long as we can continue to move that understanding, I believe when the first generation arrives, they're very strongly attached to their traditions. And then the second and third generations, there's a risk of all of that withering away, right? But again, in different communities, there's different dynamics. So I can't give you a sure answer. What I can tell you for sure is that how easily things can be taken away. And the perfect example is Spain, right? The perfect example is Spain, where Muslims actually ruled significant areas of Spain, modern day Spain, for like 700, 750 years, and lost it within essentially a couple of generations. Lost all of it, right? Back to like ground zero. So you can, apart from just having a community like we have in Canada or the UK, imagine, Muslims rule in Canada, for example, for 700 years. Still, there's no guarantee that they will be able to rule in year 800. There's no guarantee. So this is something that, the da'wah and the cause of establishing ourselves in certain lands, we pass on from generation to generation. So really, in that sense, the timing doesn't really matter, because every generation has to really take on this task, and every generation has to fulfill its responsibilities. And Muslims should never feel comfortable. They should never feel like, oh, it's done, like we're well established here, because again, there are examples, and again, Spain is the perfect one, right? You could rule a country, you could rule it and still not have it at the end as history progresses. So hopefully that's, I don't think I answered either of your questions, but hopefully that's like some interesting food for thought, inshallah.
No, most definitely. I think they're kind of like, being I'm more of an activist, and always trying to be pragmatic inside. Sometimes you're trying to understand these things so that you can guide your longer term vision. So if you were going to give some advice based upon like historical examples to activists about what moment of time we're currently in, for our community, ignoring trajectory to some extent, what would that be, and what kind of patterns of other examples could we follow?
Yeah. Again, so the challenge here is that I'm not too familiar with your community, particularly in the UK dynamic. In Canada, the community I'm more familiar with, we're much more recent. The history of Muslims in Canada is much more of a recent phenomenon. And again, I think really what's interesting is that, we have Ibn Khaldun and some of these great scholars of the past who theorized about history and reflected on it, how it's cyclical, and it moves in cycles, and eventually like dynasties emerge, or we can apply the same logic to community, that communities emerge, and then communities sort of reach their peak, and then there's a decline, and then it's not the end necessarily ever, but a new community is formed. Like you just keep going through the cycles throughout history. So I think my advice to the people would take a real, especially if you're an activist, it's like, one thing that's applicable to all times and places, all experiences of Muslims, is the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, basically, right? Which is why it's the most important period of Islamic history to study. Study the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you can, if you take a sincere, honest, very diligent look at your own particular situation in your own community, then you will be able to diligently identify, okay, which aspects of the life of the Prophet ﷺ are more directly applicable to our own situation as activists, as scholars, as community leaders, as individuals, and we can benefit from them, and which are maybe, like sort of not at the same level of importance at the moment, right? Which is why it's so beautiful how diverse the seerah is. How many different kinds of experiences the Prophet ﷺ had. It wasn't just the same, every day was the same, day in, day out, or like, the Prophet ﷺ won all the battles, or he lost all the battles. There's diversity, there's different situations, there's a lot of things going on, and all of them are rich in lessons for us. So really, that's the only advice that I would be able to give to people, that you have the seerah, which is the ultimate source, a lived example of excellence as a Muslim in this world and navigating the challenges of this world. And then on the other hand, you have your own particular local community context, right? What's happening in the UK or in London, or that's the only city I know in the UK, so let's just end it there, right? Right? What's going on over there, and what's this local situation? How are we going to apply one to the other kind of thing?
Yeah, I think I think subhanallah, it's just strange how like in the UK, and I don't know, maybe it's the same in Canada and other places as well. It's like we've kind of like a lot of us are from the Indian subcontinent, and we've kind of come over. We're still trying to get our heads around, is our culture sort of like Islamic? So like when I was staying in Pakistan, I was there for about 9 years. No one ever thinks about culture there. Like no one ever, and I hardly ever heard anyone say that we need to follow Quran and Sunnah. And it was just more about just people who are brought up in Islamic society. You hear the azan in the morning, you hear it in the evening. Kids go to the school and they learn Quran there as well. And then now you come over here, it's like, wait a minute, am I following the Quran and Sunnah properly? Like, in other words, there's this question now: is culture an antithesis to religion? So does that make sense? So how would you say historically, how would you say when people were following Islam, how much of them were kind of like emphasizing on the importance of culture? Or was it just something that they took as granted?
I think culture is like this Islam versus culture dichotomy is always overemphasized or sort of misunderstood in that sense, right? And we often hear the discussion, it's like Islam or culture, like which one should we choose? And I understand the reality behind it. Like there's many moments in life personally when people have to make a choice of whether they're gonna, follow some kind of cultural understanding or whether they're gonna follow like the authentic understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah, the original sources, and it can be difficult sometimes to navigate that. But that being said, Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, who's one of the prominent researchers and scholars, like he said it very beautifully. He says, something to the effect of like in Africa, Islam was African. In China, Islam was Chinese. Like Islam is sort of it gives you certain core ideas, a core worldview, a core set of principles through which you interpret your experiences and you interpret the world, and you make your decisions accordingly. But so much of existing culture can be sort of cleansed by Islam, can be sort of enriched by Islam, that there's not really a dichotomy there. Like when you go into like philosophy and things like that. There's this idea very strongly that humans can't exist independently of culture, right? We actually can't, and Muslim philosophers historically went into this as well, like this famous story of Hayy ibn Yaqzan and other stories, the story by Ibn Tufayl, like grappling with this idea of if a Muslim or if a child was born and left on an island abandoned and never met a Muslim their whole life, and the child just grew up around animals and things of that sort, right? Would the child ever have the possibility of realizing La ilaha illallah if they never had access to the Quran or any other human being or an Islamic teacher or book or anything like that? And they emphatically argued, Ibn Tufayl, for example, that yes, that child would have, you could logically just from, because even then, in that case, they argued that is a culture, even though it's only one person, but the culture of reflecting on nature around you, reflecting on the stars, reflecting on just the cycle of life. You see things are born and go through life and they pass away and you wonder why that's the case, etc., etc. Like, it's a very long and complicated thing, but the point is that even that is a culture. So humans, we can't exist independently of culture, which is why we need to think more deeply about this word culture when we use it. So when Islam has been practiced, the 5 pillars, right? The core, aspects of our Aqidah, right? All of those things have been preserved in many, many different cultural settings in West Africa, in Spain, in Eastern Europe, in the Ottoman Empire, in South Asia, in Indo-Malaya, right? And even nowadays, like we see there's a constant evolution. I know what you're saying about like the transplanting from South Asia to like the UK community, and similarly, because we're all immigrants, like I myself am from Pakistan, right? I was born in Pakistan, so I'm very intimately aware of like that transplanting of one cultural understanding. And then when you come to like a place like Canada, then you have to kind of make certain choices about what is my culture, what is my religion, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what we need to develop is sort of like locally developed Islamic culture, like rooted in the teachings of Islam, but at the same time looking at history and seeing all the ways historically that people found ways to both use their culture to enrich the societies in which they were living, to engage with the culture and all those sorts of things, while not compromising their aqidah or their core beliefs and principles and values in any way. So again, very complicated question, which is why I'm giving like this long-winded kind of almost non-answer. This is all just food for thought. Hopefully it's beneficial for everyone who's listening, inshallah. But I think we have to start breaking down that dichotomy and say not Islam versus culture, but Islamic culture. How do we develop that? And where can we turn to for inspiration from history and even from other communities? So maybe the UK community can learn something from the US community. I hope that's not too offensive. I know how you guys feel about the American Muslim community out there, right? Or okay, fine, not American, but community. Canadian Muslim community. Alhamdulillah, we're all very good people. We drink Tim Hortons and play hockey and say sorry a lot and say thank you a lot. Alhamdulillah, you know. So we can learn from each other and we can learn from the past about how culture could be Islamically guided, right? So that's essentially the point I'm trying to make.
Interesting. What's the like the Native Americans? Has Islam reached them? In the sense that is there a strong community of Native Americans that recognize their own like culture and also practice Islam as well?
Yeah, absolutely. In Canada, I mean the indigenous people, right, as we call them in Canada, in the United States, and amazingly, especially in Latin America, in Mexico and in South America, there's like news of entire villages, essentially, of indigenous people converting to Islam, right? And there's that interesting Spanish connection there because of the shared history between Spanish culture and Muslims, etc. Again, going back to Spain, but in Canada, in the U.S. as well, I wouldn't say there's a very significant sort of conversion to Islam or embracing of Islam. But a lot of effort is made in that direction by a lot of like dawah organizations, etc. In the prison systems, because of course indigenous people tend to be incarcerated, as a ratio more so than they are a portion of the population. And there are certain histories behind that as well. But a lot of like prison chaplains, etc. A lot of indigenous people have embraced Islam in the prison systems. We have a professor here, longtime environmental activist, and a professor of global development studies. His name is Robert Lovelace here in Canada. He embraced Islam. He read the Quran for the first time when he was 60 years old, and he embraced Islam after that, right? So he is now, and then he was actually part of the flotilla movement that went to Palestine to deliver aid. Like he was actually on the ships. He went to Palestine to deliver aid to Gaza, to the people there. And he's been part of like many community initiatives since then. And you do see a very unique understanding of Islam, especially because indigenous people tend to have a very deep and interesting relationship with like nature, right? With everything we see in nature, and with the Quran making so many allusions to nature, making so many references to nature, calling upon us to reflect upon nature. I feel like that creates for a very interesting kind of connection there that becomes the focal point of da'wah to them and for their initial introduction to Islam. So certainly they are embracing Islam, alhamdulillah.
Interesting. Okay, here's the question which everyone's waiting for. Have you watched Urtugal?
Man, I wish somehow like more episodes would come out of somewhere. I have watched it. Alhamdulillah, absolutely loved it. Still, like I find myself just, when you start searching things and then like your whole YouTube feed just ends up about that, like recommended videos. Like if I open YouTube right now, it's all gonna be like Earth to Grow, and then Earth to Grow ended and there were no more episodes. So I went to like Osman, the sequel. Right, and then when I keep up with Osman, but there's nothing more, so I went to the prequel, which is the Buyuk Selçuklu, right? So I'm loving those shows. I really appreciate the effort being put into those shows, and I think the creators of those shows, as well as Muslim media production kind of companies around the world, are taking note of the fact that, like, hey, there's a real interest for history if it's presented in this way. Although I gave a lecture in the summer basically pointing out that we know nothing essentially about the real person named Ertugrul, right? Or even Osman for that matter. We have like really no details. It's very much fictional, but that's part of, the enjoyment. Like, you can enjoy a story without having to constantly critique it about whether it was like historically accurate or not. But what you really pay attention to is the culture, right? The culture that's displayed. And that part is really, really exciting for me. As a historian, as a history buff, like, I'm absolutely in love with all of those shows.
Yeah, interestingly, I haven't watched one yet.
You haven't watched any of them?
I haven't watched any. Like, I've seen clips, but you know what? Because it's subtitles. So what I tend to do is, if I'm going to watch something, I'll put it on in the background. I'll do my work. I just listen to it and maybe just glance at it in the distance. But
If you do that with
it's like
Ertugrul, you might start speaking Turkish.
I know.
Yeah,
So
without
it's
knowing
like
what it
I've got to
means.
keep subtitles. I've got to keep looking at subtitles, and
There's
that's
also
like,
Urdu dubbed version. I don't recommend it because it sounds really archaic, like those old like dramas about the Mughals and stuff like that are terrible.
okay.
That's the kind of, they've used very like Mughal kind of Urdu.
Yeah.
So maybe that's an option, but I would recommend just, look, it's a great show. Watch the subtitles, and you'll be hooked to it.
Imagine they
You
dub
know
it
what?
in English.
Sorry?
Why did they do a dub?
Imagine
English
they
one?
dub it in English for the wider audience. Sorry, Mufti Sahib.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they could. To be honest, though, the Turkish is beautiful. That's why I have a thing against the Urdu dubbing. I understand why it's helpful to make it more accessible to more people. But man, I'm not too familiar with the Turkish language from before. But especially if you know Urdu or you know Farsi, like, the amount of words you will pick up, because of course, Persian, Farsi is essentially the common root of a lot of our languages, right? And in fact, it's very interesting. Like, a lot of the Mughals and all of these Muslim dynasties in South Asia are really just distant cousins of the Ottomans and stuff like that. Like, there's a really deep interrelationship between all of the three gunpowder empires, as they're called in the West, right? Ottomans, Safavids, and Mughals. So you'll see like so many familiar aspects of culture, right? You'll see so many, if you're from South Asia, if you're from Pakistan or India, you will hear words, right? That you're like, oh, I don't even need subtitles for that. Well, I know what that means, right? Like, so that sort of makes it exciting too. We have foreknowledge. We have, like, in our background from our own cultures, we have knowledge that helps us enjoy those stories. So that's why it's really fun to watch.
Words
Yeah, I
like
think,
Allah, Inshallah, those words we pick up on.
it's becoming a culture now, isn't it? I mean, in the UK, there are so many people now who are kind of like buying those hats, and they kind of see it as religious. They watch it so much that they believe having the attire and hairstyle and even saying the words they said and holding their chest, they actually see it as being something which is like an integrated part of our religion. Whereas, you're looking at it and you're saying, well, that's not really kind of Islamic per se. It was their culture that was, they kind of like took some
It's
Islamic
called an
aspects to
identity
it.
crisis, Mufti Saab. Identity crisis.
But that's the question, isn't it? I was asking early on. That what Altaf was asking. To what degree does something become culture? So sometimes I think it can be fluid. It's just like something that's always evolving. And
Yeah.
at the stage that we're in at the moment, it's the Urtugal. Like in 100 years' time, when they look back, they're gonna say, "What did you name your kids?" And they're gonna name the, like my name is Liaqat, yeah. So I know my granddad called me Liaqat because in Pakistan there was a minister there at one time who was very famous for Liaqat. So everyone who's called Liaqat now, that they were born in like the early 80s, late 70s. They are the Liaqats here. And then now it's like everyone who it's Saddam Hussein actually. So those people who are calling themselves Saddam Hussein today, they were born in the early 90s, late 80s because of the Gulf War. Yeah, so you have all these kind of like late 20-year-old guys who are called Saddam Hussein. And so now it's going to be the kind of Urtugal kind of thing, where the people are going to naming their kids Halima and I don't know, Turgut.
Mufti Saab, give me 1 minute. I'm going to be right back, please.
Yeah, sure, definitely. So it's like interesting how it's like people are now they found Islam, like they found Islam interesting because they watched this series. Like you meet some guys and like they'll say to me, "Oh yeah, do you watch Urtugal? Yeah, do you see how they pray and how they the oneness of Allah?" And you're thinking, I've been doing bayans in the mimbar for so many years. You never said that.
Allah.
I thought it might have been hard for the audience, okay?
Allah, right? You're gonna have all these followers now following you on Twitter because
Wait, it doesn't count if you just have the hat. You have to have the wooden spoon in your pocket.
Yeah, honestly, I'm saving up for that.
Allah. Okay, so I got a question for you then. So
Yeah.
you know, like in the books of fiqh, there's this famous masala which is it's in the Hanafi fiqh, which is, do women have to open their hair? Does women have to like open her plaits when she takes a bath, or does she just have to get water into the scalp? So the Hanafis say no, they don't have to, right? They can just get water into the scalp. That's like one of the opinions. But then they ask the question. They say, what about men? If men have plaits in their hair, do they have to open their plaits as well? So some of the Hanafis argue, well, if the ruling is for women, right, they don't have to open their plaits because it's just going to become burdensome, you know, unraveling the plait and then tying it back in. It should be the same for men. And they give the example of Turk. They say the Atrak, right, the Atrak and the Alawites, Alawiyun. Now, when I read these in the books, I have no idea what they were talking about until I heard about Urtugal. And then when people start sending me pictures, say, you look like this guy in Urtugal, I had to investigate. So then the guy had like this kind of like plait in his hair, and he had a, you know, like this, you know, that what do they call it? You know, man, what's it called? Man tail or man bun. Yeah. And then I was thinking, oh, that's what they're probably talking about. So, you know, when it comes to these kind of like for instance, the question is kind of like segueing onto something else, which is, for instance, pictures in Islam, pictures, right? So we hear about the kind of like difference of opinion regarding scholars of having sculptures and pictures, images. So when Muslims kind of spread outside of the Arabian Peninsula, and images on the walls and murals and these statues became more common now because Muslims were not, they didn't seem to kind of demolish what the other cultures had developed. Unlike, for example, like ISIS, when you saw the videos of ISIS going around in Iraq and demolishing the old statues of the old civilizations and claiming that this was Tawheed, Ibrahim alayhi salam demolished the idols, hence, you know, we have to demolish the idols as well. So historically, to what degree did Muslims kind of like what's the word for it? You know, I don't want to say
Preserve history.
purify. I don't say purify, but they began to sort of like get rid of these sort of historical things which clash with Islamic ideology.
Yeah, to be honest, you know, like we know about like Shurut Umar, right? Of Umar radiallahu anhu, and the pact he made with the people of Jerusalem when Jerusalem was conquered, and you know, in that he clarifies a certain protection through the Zimmi system of the protected non-Muslims by the Islamic State, right? And he particularly for their property, and there's a lot of terminology about the different agreements, and this is kind of like a complicated thing, but essentially their sacred places were protected, their property was protected, even the cross, the crucifix specifically is mentioned that would be protected, right? And so generally it seems like this is a good question, alhamdulillah, because I'm working on a paper for Yaqeen Institute on this right now, on this exact question. And it's a very interesting kind of approach that was taken where, you know, if you, the attitude seems to have been in a lot of cases, if you are already dominant in a land and in a society, and if the, let's say there are images or there's old architecture or art or sculptures or something like that, if they're not being worshipped necessarily, right? Like idolatry is one thing, right? If they're not being worshipped and they're just there as sort of cultural heritage, then, you know, they can be sort of left alone as they are, right? They can be sort of, and of course, I'm talking about like broad sweeps of history here. So in some cases, there were, you know, certain campaigns to destroy all images. Particularly, I believe during the reign of the Umayyad Khalifa Yazid the First, if I'm not mistaken. Or sorry, Yazid the Third. Yazid the Third, the Umayyad Khalifa Yazid the Third, not the second Yazid, which is the one that's famous or infamous from history for the things he did, but Yazid the Third. And he basically is, and that's the reason that's so well known is because it stands out as an exception, because he actually did go on this campaign of, issuing like decrees about like the images should be erased and this and that, and it was a very complicated kind of campaign in history. But in many other places, things were just sort of left as they were, and even in the modern day, people like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and they essentially reiterate the same point, like, if Islam is already established and dominant and there's no threat to the Islamic religion, there's no threat to the da'wah, if the existing art and architecture doesn't essentially pose any kind of impediment to the spread of the message of Islam within that society, and especially if there's some kind of agreement of like a Zimmi agreement or something similar along those lines, in which there has been a promise made that the property of non-Muslim communities will be respected and protected, then those images can sort of just be left alone, right? So this has been, I think, the general approach in a lot of Islamic history. Sometimes those places were appropriated. So you'll find, for example, like even the Ottomans, for example, they didn't necessarily, when they took the Hagia Sophia, right? When the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, they took the Hagia Sophia. They didn't destroy all of the engravings about, that the previous Christian occupants of that building had basically had there. They just covered them up, right? Essentially, it was like removing the problem, whatever sensitivity there was for the Ottoman Muslims to have those pictures. They covered the pictures up so they couldn't be seen, but they didn't actually destroy them. So historically, the approach has been to not sort of, especially when Islam was new in a region, to not go about alienating the people, right? To not go about alienating the local people, the local and their sensitivities in such a way that you're just going around and destroying everything that they had built or that was very near and dear to them, etc. So again, I'm not speaking about what the actual Islamic approach is ideally. What I'm speaking about is historically what was done, which can be a difference, which is an important thing to point out. Like, I can tell you a lot of things that were done in Islamic history, but maybe from an Islamic perspective or from the perspective of authentic Islamic teachings, it wasn't the best approach, right? So you have to kind of keep both things in mind. But historically, yeah, like a lot of things. I mean, even especially in India, there's this, or in South Asia, there's this narrative that Muslims destroyed thousands of temples and this and that, which is, first of all, a false narrative. They did not destroy thousands of temples. And there was a general degree of kind of respect from a distance. And the same goes in many other places for the sensitivities of the local people and their art.
I think Saudi Arabia done a fantastic job of preserving all the historical items, especially the ones on the close proximity of the Kaaba. Fantastic job, lads. Of your own religion, mashallah, tabarakallah. Forget anyone else's religion. Sorry, I had to get that one in there.
I mean, one thing,
interestingly, sorry, I've got a friend in Saudi, and I was speaking to him the other week, and he was saying to me, the things that the things that they kind of issued fatwas against 10, 15 years ago that should be demolished and wiped out are the exact same things now that they're actually preserving for tourists. So these kind of like
obviously the non-Muslims are allowed to see it. Only the Muslims can't see it. Don't you know that, Mufti Sahib? Come on, man.
Yeah, but it's interesting how the whole sort of like narrative all of a sudden changes because of political issues. But now they're kind of like preserving these things. So it's like it's in Andalus in Spain, where there was the Muwahhidun, the very sort of strict, hardcore kind of version of Islam came in, and then they began to try to implement Islam according to a very strict understanding of it. Like, so the question is that this seems to repeat itself historically. So there seems to be cycles when these kind of like a puritanical sort of like form of Islam is trying to be implemented. Is there some sort of like sort of circumstances that lead up to this? or is it just something that happens randomly?
I wouldn't say it happens randomly. I think it's a lot of it's about control, right? When you have a core set of ideas, right? And of course, it's not limited to Islam. You see, like, for example, in the previous century, in the 20th century, you see communist regimes, you see a lot of other, you see Nazi Germany, right? You see a lot of other regimes which are trying to build themselves on a core set of ideas, right? Like, the thing is to organize yourself and to give your followers like a core sense of mission, you're going to have to fixate on certain things. You can't take care of all the nuances and all the complexities and stuff like that, because then, you know, the more complex it is, the slower it moves, right? The more difficult and challenging it is to, if you care about everyone's feelings around you, it's very difficult to move forward and to achieve particular goals, right? So I think historically, like, whether it's been for lack of better terms, whether it's been very conservative Muslim dynasties or Muslim rulers, or whether it's been like very liberal leadership and they were very relaxed and allowing sort of all sorts of things to happen. Like, either way, it's been like fixated on certain core ideas, like, okay, this is all that matters. Everything else we don't care about, right? And we are going to push forward. Like, it's a way of organized, like, the way I see it, it's a way of, you know, organizing your forces, organizing your support, bringing people together around certain key kind of ideas, rather than realizing like the full nuance of society, which is why, like, which is why, like, you know, anyone who is trying to move forward in a more realistic, in a more holistic way will face more challenges, right? But it's also longer lasting, I believe. If you think of the longest lasting dynasties, I mean, how long did the Ottomans last? If you think about it, like, officially established in 1299, 1300, and officially abolished in 1922, right? Or 1924, depending on like when you see it. Like, that is a very long time for an empire to survive. But if the Ottomans had sort of been like not compromising, not making compromises, not realizing the nuances of the different situations they dealt with generation after generation of Ottoman rulers, then they might have been like, you know, just some come and go dynasties. And we've seen a lot of those in a lot of movements. Some of them didn't even get to be a dynasty, right? They just made some noise. You see so many movements in Islamic history, like, you know, there's uprisings, there's people running around and doing all kinds of things, but they don't even get anywhere. But I think generally, yeah, like the fact that they try to fixate on certain things, and when you're trying to mobilize, that's what you do historically. Like, same thing, like I said, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, a lot of movements that we've seen in recent history were the same thing, right? Like, for the Nazis, what they did in the Holocaust against the Jewish people was not something that you know, they necessarily had to, but it was a point of fixation, right? They just fixated on it so much, right, that they kind of mobilized around that. That became like a cause for people to come together around. So that's essentially my understanding of it.
Bro, I've got a quick question, sorry. How important do you think it is for somebody that studies history, or a student of knowledge that's like into history, that's his forte? How important is traveling and going and visiting these sites? Because obviously we live in a digital age now where information is readily available on the internet. But do you feel that, say for instance, you read about something and until you visited, you might have like a biased understanding up until you visit that place and understand the local history of it?
Well, I think it's super important to visit. I think visiting like gives you an appreciation that reading about it or even seeing it in documentaries and things of that sort, it couldn't give you the same appreciation, right? Like the trips I've had, even despite, like you said, so much of the heritage in the Hijaz and Mecca and Medina being erased. But reading about it and then being there, two completely different things. Similar experiences in places like Lahore or Istanbul or other places. Really, you have to be there, I think, to appreciate the significance, right? The significance. If you're surrounded by something, it's difficult. It's different than being just looking at something, kind of thing. So it's more about like where you're positioned relative to the object that you're trying to study and trying to appreciate. If you're within it, you're going to appreciate it naturally much more You're hearing the sounds, your senses are picking up the feeling of like, even like the breeze, right? If you're, all your senses are at work, internalizing all kinds of information that words or pictures will not give you. And that becomes an experience that gives you a different kind of appreciation. My favorite example is listening to an azan, which has been recorded from a certain mosque, and then listening to that azan within that mosque, right? Or for example, like watching Taraweeh as it happens in the Haram, and then actually being there, right? It's just a completely different experience because I feel like your senses are much more activated and you're immersed in it rather than just observing it. So I definitely encourage people, and even to some extent, I think, I don't want to go too far in this direction if it's not my area of knowledge or expertise, but in the Quran, like we are encouraged to essentially, we're encouraged to go see the sites of the nations of the past, the nations that have no longer survived, because that within that is a reminder for us, right, about the temporality of life and about what it is that we should really be investing in. So there's even that encouragement there, and there's many other stories that we hear. I remember again another Maghribi Sheikh, and I believe this was some point in the Middle Ages, but he, one of his students went to perform Hajj and then came back, and the first thing the Sheikh asked him was, tell me something about the pyramids, right? Because he went right by Egypt on his way to Hajj. And the student said, well, essentially, I went for Hajj, like I didn't have time to go see the pyramids. And the Sheikh said something to the effect of like, how low must a person's zeal for knowledge be that he made this once in a lifetime journey? He walked right by the pyramids and he didn't even stop to look at them and appreciate them, right? And then the student actually, like this is a story that's recorded in the books of history. The student then went, took a separate trip just to see the pyramids and come back and report to his sheikh like what he saw of them. So there are a lot of these kind of anecdotes in history about like the importance of physically engaging with those spaces, obviously within the confines of the guidance left to us by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
He took a journey all the way back. Sorry,
Yeah,
Mufti Sahib. He took a
I've
journey
got a
all the way
question
back.
based on that, which is basically so when people are living in a historic society in real time, there's clearly a difference between looking at it retrospectively and being there at that time. So, for example, when you read something, let's say, I mean, I don't know, one of the things is like when it comes to the concept of khilafah, right, which is, a lot of people seem to have this understanding of khilafah, which basically is that the khalifa, as long as we get a khalifa, everything's going to be good in the world. Everyone's going to be able to pray fajr on time. Everyone's going to be living in this nice environment. And for some reason, they seem to think that this has always been the case before their time. So it's like when I seem to study history, it kind of like automatically kind of makes me have this utopian image of history, romanticizing history. So when people used to live in history in the past, how did they kind of, or what's another word? How are we supposed to read history when, like, reading it retrospectively is not really going to give the true image of how people were really living in that time? Or maybe another way of looking at it, asking is that, is it really wise to read history in that way?
Yeah, I think part of the solution here is to read social history. So this is a very interesting kind of field that's developed, because history has always been told from the perspective of the top, right? Of either like, we have all of these people who claim the title of khulafa in Islamic history, right? They claim that title, and that's all I say. I don't say whether they were or they weren't, or they were qualified or not. I'm saying they claim the title. And usually history is written by somebody very close to them, someone in their royal court, some kind of official biographer or something like that. And it's obvious, like, it's not going to be like the most honest review generally, right? Like that's just like a basic element of critical analysis of a text, that look at who wrote it and who would benefit from the image that's being projected within that text, right? And so social history is I find much more fascinating. Now, what it requires is generally a lot more digging, a lot more investment in you're gonna have to spend more time reading and learning about things, which is why I focus on things like the Islamic history of Turkey, not the country, but the food, right, or the bird, right, or a lot of these like very small kind of interesting things. I recently wrote an article on the Islamic history of diabetes. How did
Oh,
Muslims?
sorry. What is the question? Where can we get access to this? Is it through your Twitter?
So it's on my blog. So it's www.ihistory.co. So ihistory.co, not .com.
You said that you write for Yaqeen as well, is it? Sorry.
I do. So the papers at Yaqeen Institute are more like in-depth research, like more detailed stuff. On my blog, I try to focus on a lot of like fun, quirky, interesting things about Islamic history. Like I'm saying, like I want to create this different image, a different approach. What was the experience of diabetes in Islamic history? How did Muslim physicians try to treat this condition known as diabetes? Right? What was the history of Turkey? All of these different kinds of things. And so what that does is that it changes your narrative and gives you everyday experiences, everyday stories, right? So there's a lot of books being written. One of my favorite, I love to eat, alhamdulillah, right? I'm a bit of a foodie, right? So food history is the fastest growing subfield of history in Western academia, right? Like the history of food. Why? Because it's the same trend, not just within Muslims, but a lot of people are realizing in a lot of different cultures that, hey, history has always been written from like the perspective of, like the big shots in society and the people of influence and power and things like that. What were the ordinary people doing? And one of the best ways to see what the ordinary people were doing was to look at the history of food, because everyone has to eat food, right? So everyone has to eat food to survive. So they take that trajectory. And so you can find a book on 13th century Anatolia, actually Ertugrul's time. One of the sources that you can find to learn about the culture of Ertugrul's time is a book on 13th century Anatolia, and you'll find all kinds of interesting anecdotes. So it's a book about the food culture of that place at that time. So, like stories about Maulana Rumi and a lot of other people who we know of their names, but like it'll tell you, the book is telling you what Maulana Rumi was eating, right? Like what was his meals like and all of these kinds of things. So social history, when you start looking at the history from the bottom, the history of different aspects of culture, the history of different experiences, the history of individuals, right? The history of particularly like if people left biographies or memoirs, and there certainly are some of those in Islamic history as well. So it's more about diversifying our scope of what we read. And to be honest, I think mostly in the Muslim community, there's no reading done of Islamic history, right? It's very much
it is very limited.
Scope. Yeah, it's very little and few and far in between. So hopefully, when we do start to make more concerted efforts, and really, I hope people will keep this in mind. Like if you work for an Islamic school, or if you're at a masjid and you're trying to figure out what to discuss in your khutbah, right? Or if you're at an Islamic school trying to figure out like a lesson plan for the history class for the students, etc. I hope hopefully we will like put enough content on the internet so when people Google that stuff, they run into my blog where a lot of other people are doing a lot of excellent work. They run into those sources, and that inspires them to basically tell the history from below. One of the great books I read recently is about an Ottoman soup kitchen. Again, food history, right? But the wife of Sultan Suleiman I, Kanuni Suleiman, his wife Hurram Sultan had established as a waqf a soup kitchen in Jerusalem, in the city of Jerusalem. So, we have all kinds of records that have been discussed in that book about, who was fed what kind of soup and what kind of bread and how was the bread made and where were the cauldrons brought from and how watery was the soup on some days and how thick was it on other days, and all of these things tells you a lot about society. It's really fun to read. Yes, there's a little bit of a mention of the, the high level people of, Hurram Sultan and her husband Suleiman Kanuni, but the rest of it is just fascinating. You're getting a picture of what was medieval Jerusalem like, right? So that kind of thing I think is very helpful to break down like what you're alluding to there.
On a side note, I don't know if you remember Mufti Saab, we had one of the Yaqeen speakers at Asufa, Sheikh Muhammad al-Shanawi, and I think one of his best lectures was a lecture called The Wild West.
I don't know if you've actually listened to it. I'll advise all our viewers online as well to inshallah check it out. It's called The Wild West, and he talks about when England and Europe was going through the Dark Ages. It was actually the golden age of Islam in Spain, and he just talks about how we had hospitals like literally 800 years before other places. And I do find it fascinating, and I must agree with you that when people do actually dwell into history, and I'm not just talking about the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but even a few hundred years after, a few centuries after, that the lecture it just comes to life because you've got another source of material to refer to. Not just obviously we refer to the Quran and Sunnah, but if even Orientalists are documenting something that is obviously beneficial to Muslims as a representation, then definitely I think it plays a big part in making people feel like we've got an identity and we've got this thing that we should be proud of, and rather than just being force fed or whatever, like the modern day media tells us.
Yeah, certainly. And to be honest, you're absolutely right. We really need to, but we need to diversify that though. Again, like what are the achievements that Muslims are proud of? See, this is the thing. We will go to people and tell people Muslims invented algebra, like Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra, right? The problem is, like, if you come to me and say Al-Khwarizmi invented algebra, I'll be like, I didn't even pass algebra class, man. Like, I don't care about algebra. Like, it's such a, we focus on certain kinds of achievements at the expense of others, which is why I tell people, a lot of people, I'm like, look, if you ever have the opportunity, if you want to talk to someone about what Muslims contributed to the world and build an identity around that, talk to them about coffee, right? Talk to them about how Muslims gave the world coffee, literally, because that is relatable to a far wider range of people than saying algebra, right? Or going into like the specifics. If I start telling them about Ibn Tufayl and his philosophical argument, etc., you see what I do when I tell people about that? I start backwards, and so Ibn Tufayl's Hay Ibn Yaqzan is considered by historians of literature. It was written in the 12th century by historians of literature as the first novel ever written, like in novel form. And when the first novel, Robinson Crusoe, was written like a couple of centuries later in England, the first novel in English, it was almost like the same story. If anyone here has read Robinson Crusoe, it's like the same story. And that's why historians kind of try to figure out, like, was there any plagiarism going on here? Basically from Ibn Tufayl to Robinson Crusoe. So when you talk about, and then what did that eventually turn into? Tarzan, right? It eventually turned into like Jungle King and all of these stories, the same concept. If a kid grows up in the jungle, is he going to be able to find the bigger truths of life, right? Another good example is the jury system. The 12-member jury system is something from North African Maliki law, right? The Lafif system that had been developed in North African Maliki law because of basically the stringent requirements for having a certain level of testimony for a ruling to be passed. It eventually moved from North Africa to Sicily, and then I think it was King Henry II in England. One of his assistants had been trained in Sicily, and he brought that concept of having those 12 jurors to the UK, and then from the UK it spread to everywhere, like in Canada, in other places all around the world, we still have a 12-member jury system who play essentially the exact same roles that were developed for them in medieval Maliki law in North Africa. So there's so many of these examples, like everything from eggplants. What you guys, I'm saying eggplants, you guys call them, I think, aubergines, right? Is that what they're called? Am I pronouncing it right? Right? Yeah. Aubergines is the word. It comes from the Arabic name of a 9th century Muslim woman in Baghdad. Her name was Al-Buran, right? She was the wife of, what's his name? The son of Harun al-Rashid. His name is skipping my mind. So basically she's a queen, right? Or a princess in Baghdad, in Abbasid Baghdad. And in history, you'll find like eggplants had this certain kind of mystique to them, or aubergines, right? A certain kind of mystique. Like, you'll find poetry by the Arabs saying like, this is like, they're comparing it to like all kinds of horrible things. Doctors would say eggplants cause freckles and cancer and all kinds of things. These are Muslims I'm talking about. So this woman, and really the reason was because of the bitterness of the taste, right? There's no way to make it taste good. So she basically experimented, and she found this new technique of making eggplants or using eggplants in food that took away some of the bitterness, which is something like you keep your eggplant in salt water and dissolve it in salt water for a certain number of hours. You take it out, then you boil it in like sesame seed oil. You take it out, then you add it to whatever meal you want, and the bitterness is taken away. And you can see, like, I actually did research on this. You can see how the poetry changes. Right now, they're like, the Arab poets are like, this is like it's like a black pigeon resting on a green leaf or something like that, right? And you can see how the doctor is suddenly like, okay, yeah, maybe it doesn't cause cancer, right? Like the whole culture changes. So you can go to like Turkey and you can have al-Borani. You can go to Afghanistan, you can have al-Borani, right? You can go to like Spain, Morocco, or Brania in Morocco. You can go to Spain, you can go to Portugal, you can go to the UK, aubergine, it literally comes from that same Arabic root, her name, Al-Buran, right? And in fact, it's funny, in the Caribbean, they completely lost context of the original story, so they call it brown jolly, right? They remember the pronunciation, but they forgot what it actually means. So in many Caribbean islands, they call the aubergine, they call it brown jolly. Like it's still Buran, but the context is, totally been lost. So you see what happening here is that when you tell someone this kind of story of something that's this familiar, trust me, every time they go to the grocery store, the supermarket, and they see an aubergine there, they're going to think of it. And they're going to think of the Muslims and Baghdad and everything. If you tell them about algebra, chances are there's very few situations in life when that's actually going to be relevant or pertinent to their lives. So this is why, like things like social history, the history of sports, right? The history of wrestling in the Muslim world, the history of food, history of clothes. What did Muslim cultural history is so important for us to understand and share. And like I mentioned, coffee is the best example. Like you're absolutely right that we need to take pride in this history, but we also need to diversify. Like literally the things I can list for you that Muslims contributed to, not just the West, by the way, also to the East, like Muslim contributions to Chinese culture, East Asian culture, all over the world. Like the list is very, very long, and there are things there like from ice cream to like tulips that you'll never think of, right? But those are the examples that suddenly it's a different kind of relevance. Everyone knows what a tulip is and what the significance is of a tulip, and we all give tulips to express certain feelings to certain people, right? So that creates like a different kind of meaning.
Yeah, I think the interesting that you mentioned there was things like culture, clothing, because if you kind of look at it from a purely just like a textual hadith, like a Sahaba cultural sort of like way, you see as we shouldn't be eating too much. Our meals should be very simple. The clothing that we wear should be very simple. And then all of a sudden you see like ziryab in Baghdad, and then the ziryab sort of like fashion that spreads in Andalus, and then these three course meals and the clothing and even the musical like instruments that were designed by him. So the question basically I have is, there's a famous like I'm asking you a lot of questions to do with fiqh because I haven't found a historian that I can ask them like these kind of fiqh related questions. So there's a famous masala which is, can you play dice in Islam? Yeah, and games.
Yeah.
So it's strange because the texts are very clear. The early texts are very clear that playing some sort of games is considered to be wrong in Islam. It's against the way that the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba used to do things. And there was only like 3 or 4 games that were permitted: wrestling and horse riding and swimming. But then if you look at it historically, it's like Muslim countries have come out with games that you never heard of in the past. So like if you're in Pakistan, cricket. Yeah, everyone on the street in Ramadan, Maulvis, non-Maulvis, everyone just puts some wickets up on the street, blocks the traffic, and everyone starts playing cricket. And then you got like Ludo, right? I think everyone over there knows how to play Ludo. And then you got like cards, and then you got all these other sort of like games. So my question is like, how does this kind of like a culture come about? This games culture. Is it a sign of the weakness in the society? They're religious. Is it a sign that their religious sort of religiosity is a bit weak, and then they start to focus more on the distraction and entertainment? Or is it something which is you find it to be okay with the religion? People are still practicing their religion.
I think historically, like it's kind of like the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, did the mas'ala develop because of the popularity of the game, or was it preemptive, or it really depends on exactly how these things played out. Like Muslims, like you mentioned, like things like cricket, etc., were brought by the British, right, to South Asia. So that's more of like a recent thing. But if you think of something like chess, for example, literally a game that was essentially created and spread to the world by, again, the Persian culture. I always find it funny, like when my dad's Punjabi, okay, so when I was younger, you do something stupid, and my dad would say, "Teri shamat aa gayi," like your shahmat is coming, meaning
Oh,
but
that's where it
it's
comes
literally
from.
checkmate. Is checkmate means shah? It comes from the word shahmat. It means your king is dead, right? You're about to get toppled off your high horse. So things like that, like Muslim snakes and ladders was the game Snakes and Ladders was invented in Muslim Iran, right? And then spread from, like, you can find in very, very old texts of history, like you can actually find the board and the snakes and the ladders and everything like drawn out just the way you'd find it today if you bought it. So, Muslims, when they spread, they inherited a lot of local culture, that were kind of in development already, things that were kind of popular already. And also something to keep in mind is that, like I mentioned earlier, like some Muslim societies were kind of very, very cosmopolitan, very relaxed, right? Like very relaxed, like all kinds of things would happen. And that's why oftentimes Orientalists and others will take certain instances of something happening and they will exaggerate, right? They will completely take them out of proportion. Like, yes, you will find records of, Ibn Sina used to drink alcohol, right? Ibn Sina used to drink a lot of alcohol based on the records, and so they will misuse that in the sense that they'll take that and they'll be like, oh yeah, alcohol was okay during Ibn Sina's time. Why? Because Ibn Sina drank alcohol. There's kind of circular logic, right? Maybe he's just an exception that you happen to know of, right? And similarly with many, many other things, games and many other things of that sort. So there's no kind of standard answer for this. I think historically um, there was a constant kind of tension between, from the ulama's perspective. And I want to be very careful, inshallah, with my words here and what I say. From the ulama's perspective, it was their responsibility to make sure that the truth was clarified, right? That the truth was clarified based on what they could understand, based on the Quran and the Sunnah and the methodology that they employed and their knowledge of the local context. Whether that was actually enforced very thoroughly, or whether that was actually accepted and practiced very thoroughly, is a different question, right? So the ulama might say that using dice as part of some game or anything like that is not permissible or not encouraged, but that doesn't mean that everyone in that society might be playing with dice, which is why I always say it's so important to differentiate between Islamic history and Islam, right? Islamic history is not Islam. Islamic history is the experiences of Muslims, right? Certainly, there were some core kind of principles and core aspects of identity that people identified as Muslims. People probably, they stuck to certain core principles of Aqidah and, their practice of Islam in terms of prayer and fasting and all of those things. But that does not mean that we look at any Islamic society of the past and say that if, especially if you find something in books of fiqh, etc., that this was something that was widely enforced or widely practiced. The ulama, they fulfilled their responsibility. I mean, just because the whole society is doing something doesn't make it right. So they had to fulfill their responsibility to make sure that they were standing up for the truth in their books, etc. But certainly, like for general society, like in Islamic history, and I'm saying this, emphasizing this specifically for anyone who might be listening, because once you actually start reading history, you will find all kinds of things. People, not only do they claim to be Muslim and they're doing them, but they claim to be doing them in the name of Islam, right? Like, I'll give you the most extreme example. I hope nobody will take this and take it as like a generic example, that there were a certain group of cannibals in Islamic history who claimed that they were doing a good deed by cannibalizing, like they would literally eat human meat of the forces. They were basically a group in an army, in a Persian army, and they would eat the meat of the people that they had killed, and that was for them like sort of a good deed. Again, extreme example. Don't take it as like a run of the mill, but I give you the extreme to basically inform you of all of the possibilities, right? And also don't believe when people take those examples and stretch them, right? A lot of Western books, like it's funny to read because they will argue, like every once in a while, an article will pop up and they'll be like, there were so many homosexual Muslims in history. Like they'll just say that, like there's so many, and they're like, we have the evidence, right? And I'm thinking, I'm like, their evidence is probably like, you know, if they were to walk into a mosque on Eid and they saw all the men hugging each other, right? And then like somebody took a picture of that, and then 1,000 years from now, somebody wrote a book, and they're like, I got the proof. They were all there inside the mosque. You ever wonder what they did inside the mosque? They were all hugging each other, and this is proof that, you know, Muslims historically were homosexual. Like that's the way it gets misused and stretched, right? Like there's a lot of like, you know, platonic expressions of affection that are completely permissible in Islam that have nothing to do with homosexuality, but that's the only understanding that a Western gay scholar might derive from that. So we have to keep a balance between both, realizing the diversity of Muslim experiences and the diversity of the things that Muslims did, and a lot of them were completely unacceptable, and a lot of them were sort of in gray areas, right? And then on the other hand, we have to make sure that those same.
Oops, I think his internet's cut off. Yeah, back. Yeah, Hassan, Adil, welcome.
Sorry?
I think the internet didn't like you.
Yeah,
Tried to censor you there.
I think somebody in some server didn't like that piece of information, so they decided.
I mean, I think that the what you raised there, I think that just hit the nail on the head, because you know that the issue which Naveed was mentioned by the identity. We try to Islamize everything, like everything that we belongs to us. It's like, you know, we say like ye hamara Maulvi hai. Yeah, so any Maulvi that kind of speaks what we like, it becomes our Maulvi. So it's like everything becomes Sunnah, everything becomes Islamic. Algebra has become Islamic now, and the mobile phone, but by virtue of the algebra, has become, you know, Islamic, and the whole world is basically Islamic. And all we're waiting for is everyone just to like just say the Shahada, because there's nothing left now. So okay, I think last thing before we wrap up, I had a question. I don't know if you guys have a question. I had a question, which is, so like, what it seems from my sort of like just like brief understanding of what you've been mentioning is that it's a minefield. History is a minefield. Reading a history can be very difficult, especially when you're reading it from an Orientalist, because Orientalists can make things seem very nice, the way they write their writing is, and it seems very you know, appeasing to a lot of the public. So as a layperson, when it comes to history, what would you advise? Is there any sort of like steps that we should take, certain books progressively study, or articles, or should we just do taqleed of like certain individuals when it comes to history?
No, I think I don't recommend doing taqleed per se. I you know, I'll take the risk of encouraging a bit of a free thinking approach here, and letting people learn on their own. What I do kind of suggest to people whenever they ask me this kind of question is that learn the history that is most intimate to you, because that's the history that you will most easily understand. So obviously, you know, and this is something that more for parents of children, is that from a young age, you have to get them started on the Quranic history, the stories that are in the Quran, and then the seerah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like these things are essential. The child should not be making decisions at the age of like 18 or 20 about, okay, now it's my time to read seerah, right? That should have started way long ago. Of course, there's different experiences. So if you are sort of at that place and you don't have a background in Sirah or the Qasasul Anbiya or anything like that, then, you know, refer to your local qualified trusted scholars, ask them which books you can begin with, and have a conversation with them, express your curiosity. Inshallah, they will be able to guide you to what is best for you, given your, you know, local availability of books and resources, and especially classes. Hopefully, once COVID and everything is over, it's best to learn the seerah from a scholar, right? From an Islamically qualified scholar. And it's the same thing goes for the Qasas al-Anbiya, and especially if it can be done in person, that is ideal. But beyond that, people are like, okay, so what after that? And then what I tell them is that learn your family history, right? And I believe the hadith is in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually said, learn your lineage, right? Essentially, learn your family history. And the purpose he specified is that it helps you solidify and strengthen your family ties, right? And so, like this hadith is very clear, and I find it very fascinating that it's a good deed to learn your family history in that sense. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam specifically encouraged it. Learn your family history, talk to your elders, talk to like your aunts and uncles, your grandparents, have those conversations, ask them about their experiences. Islamic history doesn't mean that it was just Salahuddin, right, who did everything. Like your personal history is important. And I really like to drive this point home, inshallah, to people that your personal history is very, very important. And it's going to be the history that you understand the best and that you have a more intimate connection with, and it's very close to the present. It informs your daily decisions as well as your future, right? History of your grandparents and great grandparents as far back as you can go. And then beyond that, like, what is your field of work, right? So this is another thing. If you're a student, what is your field of study? If you're working, a professional or an entrepreneur or something, what is your field of work basically? Reach out to like a historian like myself or somebody else and let us help you find resources that have to do with your field of work. You know, people ask me a lot of times to talk about like Muslim contributions to medicine, to the medical tradition. And I have an extremely difficult time doing that. Like I can try my best to do that, but it's very difficult for me to do. Why? Because I don't understand anything about medicine, right? So, I can like tell you that Al-Zahrawi invented the syringe that's used all over the world. But if you ask me like 2 questions about a syringe, I'm going to be sitting there like, I don't know anything about that. But somebody who is already in that field, if you're an engineer, what's Muslim contributions to engineering, right? If you're a business person, what are how did Islam spread through business? There's history in all of these things, right? Like whatever field you're in, again, about how intimate, how close you are personally to that history. And why I say that is because that's how people learn to enjoy history, right? Because you can relate to it so much. If I give you if I say, well, now it's time for you to start reading about the Umayyads, yeah, you might have like some level of curiosity and interest, but trust me, that stuff, you'll never internalize that knowledge in the first go. You'll never be able to immediately make connections to your own life. Umayyads were in the Middle East. They were like 13 centuries ago, completely different context, dynamic, everything like that. For you, what matters is like, what were the Umayyads doing in terms of engineering? If you're an engineer, that's what you're going to be interested in. How was the Dome of the Rock designed, right? How was the Umayyad mosque designed? All of those are the questions you should be asking. And so that's what I encourage people to do, like, Qasas al-Anbiya, your seerah, your personal family history, and then the history that you will engage with on a daily basis, your field of work or your field of study. Once you get past all of those and you have some, you've gone down the road in a certain direction and all of those, then like I would feel comfortable saying, okay, like now let's talk at a more serious level. You want to learn about the Umayyads and the Abbasids and the Mughals and all of these things, you can do that, right? So this is sort of my approach to how I tell people to go about it.
Alhamdulillah. I definitely benefited a lot. Alhamdulillah. And I've still got a whole list of questions in my head that I need to ask, and inshallah, maybe in the future.
This is a really
inshallah,
fun conversation. I appreciate you guys, and be happy to be back on, inshallah, to keep talking about history. Is an endless subject.
From a person who teaches, that's my job, teaching like Islamic sciences and giving talks. It's like I've started to see that as I'm becoming older, that there's more importance in people recognizing what happened in history rather than quoting ayats and hadith all the time. Because sometimes what can happen is that the ayats and the hadith can be taken in a vacuum without understanding, the application of these ayats, and you know, the Quran tells us history just as it tells us instructions as well. So for me, it's like really enriching. I think what you mentioned about the history of how we need to look at history in different ways, and the pitfalls that a lot of readers of history make when it comes to reading the wrong types of historic quotes and looking at it from the wrong lens. So yeah, you guys got any questions?
I've got a question, bro. It's a bit
Yeah.
unrelated. Do you have any plans of coming to the UK anytime soon? Because I know two people personally that I think you'd get on like a house on fire. One is Sheikh Zahir Mahmood. The other person is probably Ustad Adnan Rashid. So these guys love the history. I can see you in a room with these two guys.
You know,
Actually, it
I'm,
might be a good idea. Sorry, it might be a good idea to actually, if Brother Munir can come down, maybe have like an event after COVID.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone at the moment has done history. Like some full
inshallah,
like
I
kind
really
of
appreciate that opportunity. And to be honest, I smiled and shook my head as soon as you said, I don't know if it's pronounced Sheikh Zahir Mahmood. I guess I've always called him Zahir Mahmood.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, I grew up listening to his, like he was one of my first introductions to history. Absolutely love him, absolutely appreciate like the kinds of things I've learned through him, mashallah. And also like I got a chance to meet him when he came to Toronto for the RIS conference a few years ago. I just ran into him on the escalator and I wouldn't let him go. Right. And it was just a great moment for me, alhamdulillah. So yeah, I would absolutely, I have some family in the UK who I've never really met. I've never had a chance to really go out there. So they're in like Birmingham and Manchester or something like that.
Oh,
Birmingham,
sure.
You
Sharif.
do know other cities,
Right?
brother.
Birmingham,
You do
Sharif.
know other cities.
So inshallah, I'd love to visit and meet you all in person, inshallah, and meet others in the
Inshallah.
community. And also like I know there's a lot of good like history work, SOAS. If I see those four letters, I know it's not perfect. I know it can be problematic at sometimes, but if I see those four letters anywhere, that person's immediately interesting to me, right? And there's a lot of people I'd love to meet in the UK who are also doing, I think, a lot of great work along the lines of what I'm trying to do as well. So I really look forward to that experience, inshallah. And I appreciate you guys thinking of it.
Sheikh, I just had one slight correction for you. You visit the UK, you do pilgrimage to Birmingham.
Pilgrimage, okay. Right. Right.
Alhamdulillah.
Altaf, you had a
I'll have to
turkey.
get-
You're calling Birmingham a pilgrimage. Astaghfirullah. I wonder what your third statement's going to be.
Sheikh, Mufti Sahib, I didn't say it's the pilgrimage. I said it's a pilgrimage.
He said ziyara.
Come on, man. No, I'm trying to get Arabic and English lessons together here.
Oh, sorry. That's the kind of jurist kind of side of my brain kicking in there.
Habibi, is Sheikh Abdul Hakim Quick still active? Because I know he takes a very keen interest in history in general, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He's still very much active, mashallah. I mean, he came to Toronto from the US in 1970 and he converted to Islam. He was about 20 years old at the time. And since then, it's been half a century, mashallah, and he does not stop. He has taught so much history here in Canada and in the US and other places. Mashallah, I've had an opportunity, the blessing of living here very close to him and meeting him and learning from him and working with him on a lot of projects. So he's certainly still active, slowing down a little bit. But hopefully we can sort of work in his shadow, mashallah. We can sort of, carry forward from all of the incredible work that he did and others have done before us and carry that work forward and make our own contribution, may Allah accept.
I think I've just organized a history conference, so we've got 4 people now. All we need is a nasheed artist to sing some Earth to Gold's kind of song. So I'm sure there's.
All you need is a Kawali now.
Kawali, that's it.
We need a Mawali.
I'll get my friend Liaquat. Who seems to be very interested.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jazakumullah khair, Brother Hassan. Really enjoyed having your company, alhamdulillah. And may Allah bless you. And hope, inshallah, later on in that we can have you, inshallah, again.
Inshallah. Look forward to it. Jazakallah khairan, brothers.
Oh, yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Take care.
MashaAllah, I think that was another fantastic history. I think history for me is fascinating because the way we kind of misunderstand history. So when you get like a historian who knows what he's talking about, and then you get like someone like me who doesn't know what he's talking about, then it kind of makes it more interesting because I come out with a kind of like romanticized understanding of history, and then he kind of like clarifies it. So it kind of makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know how you guys kind of like history or not, whether it's something.
I think I'm gonna be
fascinates you.
history if Sheikh Zahid actually watches this back and he's like, you know me better than most people, yeah. How come you call me Sheikh Zahid? And the guy corrected you. So I think I'll become history very soon.
Oh, it's actually his name is actually Dha with a Dha.
Yeah.
Dhahir. So
There's
you're
a
both
brother
wrong.
Hassan more there. You work at a Sufan, like Sheikh is like obviously.
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Yeah, but Alhamdulillah, I think
It'd be good to put these guys in touch. I think they're probably both benefit from one another, inshallah ta'ala.
Yeah, definitely.
And you charge a commission, Mufti Saab.
That's it, bro. That's it.
This channel ain't gonna fund itself, brothers.
I'll make some ta'weezes as well. I'll sell some history ta'weezes.
Yeah. But to be fair, history, like you say, Mufti Saab, you could speak on it for hours and hours. I always find it like whenever I meet Adnan Rashid, yeah, bro, I'm just sitting there.
Why don't we get him on sometime?
We should do, inshallah, definitely. He's got like a coin collection and he collects pages like old mushafs and stuff like that. Like it's amazing, man. I'll get gobsmacked by this kind of stuff. Another quote, yeah, like I don't know, like history. I think one of my uncles used to say, he goes, history isn't actually that old. The way we see history and we think that it doesn't relate to us, and everything that happened in the past, and it leaves a ripple for the future. Allah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of times what tends to happen is what we were saying in the beginning, romanticizing history. It's like we always think Muslims have always been so good, mashallah. All the leaders have been like tahajjud, fasting all day, fasting all night, like doing 10 khatams every single day. And in reality, it's like it's not the case all the time. And then it kind of makes it difficult for us to be able to live as Muslims because we create such high expectations of how the Muslims in the past used to. So everyone, like he said, everyone for us, everyone's Salahuddin basically. Everyone's Salahuddin. Everyone's Umar al-Khattab. Everyone's Rabia Basriya. Anyway, I think we should finish the Altaf. You've been quiet, bro.
I know, just listening.
Altaf is just reading all the refutations about his Turkey on his Instagram, probably.
Actually,
Have you had any funny messages?
we're doing a podcast on the 30th of January with HMC on a on the Halal Burger Group. So it used to be called the Halal Burger Group. It's now called the Best Halal Food. It's about 15,000 people on there, but they're always asking HMC questions. So we just announced that we're doing a live webinar with Sheikh Yunus.
So why are they all asking HMC? Is it because they're from a particular background?
No, it's just that there's so many anti-HMC people.
Oh.
So there's like 80% of the world don't care, right? Then there's 10% that are really pro HMC, and there's like 10% who are like actively anti-HMC. And so like 80% of just
all the people that refuse to pay.
Is it like that? What's that mask that they have? What's that mask that they have? That kind of
the anonymous mask.
The anonymous. Is it like that?
The V for Vendetta mask.
It's quite funny because like I was saying that if you actually heard them speak, if you heard like Maulana Yunus and a few others speak, you probably would be like the 80%. Like just chilled out. You 10% fanboys would chill out, and you 10% haters would chill out as well. You just need to listen to people.
Is it too late? Is it too late to form our own halal monitoring committee? Obviously, call it something else.
These kind of things, never too late. There's always look how many Muslim charities there are. You just use the words. I think they got the random word selected. They put the word Muslim, Ummah, Islam, appeal, all in a thing in it, and basically whatever one comes out, you just call yourself that.
You pick up one of the words.
It's not going to make sense. It's going to be called like Ummah Islam or something like that, and you'll be like, why have you called your charity that? Bro, is the only one.
I'm gonna try and get. I bumped into him today, mashallah. He's a really, really entertaining guy to even have a conversation with. Is Dr. Salman Butt. He'd be an interesting guy to get on our podcast,
What's
He's a
what's
character,
his
mashallah.
specialty?
Podcasts. Doctors, I think he's an author at Islam 21C, I believe.
Otherwise, he
Okay.
adopted.
I'm not too sure. Surprisingly, we talked about everything other than him.
Shatrila, what's quite funny is that you know that 3 Dates podcast. It looks like it's printed on your wall.
Allah, subhanallah. Subhan. This is how dedicated Naveed is. He prints it on his wall.
The that actually looks quite good. But one
Actually,
topic: how Muslims can use technology to benefit.
Allah, bhai, this is you haven't said who designed this, bhai. You have all ignored the main thing. Who was the designer of this? Who came up with this designer putting the logo in the corner and making it like this? Yeah,
Mufti.
and I don't want to destroy his sincerity or my sense. Anyway, I think we should call it a night.
Guys, just a disclaimer, I'm not going to be with you guys next Thursday. I'm actually going to be in Lebanon. So,
Oh, you're gonna go there, yeah?
Lebanon not the thing about any like what you call it now, any sanctions or something, COVID, because everybody seems to be flying there. Like I get a text message like from like 10 people now.
I'm not too sure because I think a lot of the organization, I know there's a number of charities that have actually gone out there. We've got to take a group of individuals that we're going for the sake of work, bro. We're not going on a deployment or anything like that. But yeah, there's a lot of...
bro.
What was that? Sorry.
Are you doing volunteerism?
No, I'm not doing nothing.
Wait a minute. Isa alayhi salam, Jesus was born in the Middle East. Christmas is very close. You're going to Lebanon.
I'll actually be there. I'm going to be in Beirut for Christmas.
I saw a fatwa. It means you can't eat turkey at lunchtime on Christmas Day. But I don't know whether the fatwa didn't go into too much detail. He didn't say whether after Maghrib it counts as Boxing Day or whether midnight counts as Boxing Day. So I was really confused by it. So I'm just having mine on the 24th in the evening. Hopefully that's all right.
Oh, what if
Are
you
you
do
going
this?
to try doing
Wait,
that?
wait. What if you make it and then you send it to someone else to eat? You don't eat it yourself?
What about if I don't do that and I just
I thought you're going to do the bird and a bird and a bird thing.
yeah, hopefully probably in January, early January.
You're not doing it on Christmas Day.
No, I'm gonna smoke a turkey on Saturday, so you can follow me on Instagram.
Smoke turkey. Oh, you mean cook smoke? Okay, I was not the most common thing to smoke.
Yeah, I've got to drop some steak off to you guys next week as well, innit?
Oh yes.
Eat it on
So
the
maybe next week we'll have a break next week, not because it's Christmas, but we'll just have a break next week and then we'll resume.
Mufti Saab's gonna take his tree out and put those lights to use.
Thursday night.
On my
Christmas
street,
Eve
you know
is when
what?
Santa
I'll tell you
comes,
something,
innit?
yeah.
Christmas Eve.
I'll tell you something. You know, outside when you go at night time, you drive and you see all the lights on people's houses, the Christmas tree. It does look nice, yeah. And
We don't have that
throw
in
fatwas
Spot,
at me,
brother.
please. Don't throw that fatwas at me, but it does look kind of like nice.
What road do you live on now?
Listen, we've got lazy people that haven't taken the Milad lights down. That's all.
You know, a couple of years back when Milad time and Christmas like crossed over, and like everybody just had lights on. Like you could drive around.
Oh,
like
yeah.
normally you go to Perry Bar, Great Bar, they'd have lights on, but then you go to Aston, they'd have lights on as well. You like a bit.
Yeah.
You could see Birmingham from the sky, brother. Allah. It's like a green and red light.
Aliens gonna attack now.
But you know the funny thing is we put a different level of lights. So like if you got those, if a mosque has those like you know those multicolored lights that you get on like festivals on their mosque, we would like
go behind.
yeah, like those kind of lights. Everybody looks at them like, oh my gosh, they've got those types of lights. But if another mosque had like just white floodlights lit up, right, the mosque that look a little bit classy, right, for certain audiences, like you'd look up to that and you'd look down at another set of lights. And the funny thing is that people would always say that you're wasting money, and you're like they're both wasting money, to be honest.
It is what
Well,
it
it's
is.
not. It's their money and it's the public's money.
It's not our money.
It's not the mo-
Move this on.
It's not the mosque money. It's the public's money.
Maybe it's gift aid. But then it's still technically the
Okay,
public's money.
so if you're going to Lebanon, are you gonna what are you gonna do there? Are you gonna
We're taking there's a masjid basically that we work with. We're taking them out. They're gonna do some filming, inshallah, and I'm gonna go just see some projects, inshallah, and see what we're gonna do. Also, want to go see Beirut, see what the current situation is. I don't think that the Beirut crisis can be actually, you can help the people, but that's something that, government level is not something that, like, even the biggest Islamic or non-Islamic charities, they can't solve the issues that are happening in Lebanon at the moment. They need infrastructural help, economic help, like, I'm talking government billions, that kind of stuff.
But
I know
the
there's
only-
some people from Asufa have gone at the moment as well, haven't they?
Yeah.
When are they back, Mufti Sahib? Do
I
you know?
think in about 3 days' time.
3 days. Okay, I thought I might bump into him, but he's gonna. I highly doubt it. If we fly out on Monday,
Yeah.
they'll probably be back by then, wouldn't they?
Maybe us three should go on a trip, I think that'd be good.
That would be good, inshallah. How about Bosnia? Would you want to go Bosnia?
Yeah, definitely. And as long as there's nice food there. Oh,
We
if
got
I'm
a
going to be
coffee
insincere, I might as well be insincere openly, yeah. If there's good food there, yeah, I'm ready to go.
Mustafa, I'm traveling with you. Don't worry, I got you covered, man.
I'll say, bro. Allahu Akbar.
Just need to bring my seasoning with me, and we just need to find some meat. Would be good.
Inshallah.
Let's
Red,
go
white.
hunting.
Actually,
should go
yeah.
fishing.
Actually, in
We
these
should go
holidays,
fishing.
I can invite you guys to my house, innit?
Yeah,
Because
three
three
families.
households. All right. Yeah, okay.
Have you ever been
So,
fishing, guys? Have you ever actually been fishing?
Oh, this one thing I want to do, but I don't want to go on a boat. I want to do it from like the side of it.
Don't do it in Birmingham Canal, bro. The kind of
Why do
things
you
I've
wanna
seen
do it on a
inside the
boat?
Birmingham Canal, you do not want to catch a fish in Birmingham Canal.
Somebody was
What
telling me
about
that.
a boat with off phobia?
Pardon? Nah, yeah, I can't swim.
No, not about swimming. I'm like, what about if you were on like something that resembled a ferry, bro? You'd be okay then, yeah.
Well, when you said something that resembles a ferry,
When
how are
when
you
you
gonna fish when you're on a ferry, bro?
when you
Have you seen how high they are?
when you just spoke about thing about going fishing, right? You were talking about. Like, I was imagining a fishing rod. The way you're talking about it is that we're going to be working in one of those trawlers that that catches big lots of fish.
We're gonna catch.
Them all.
You know the guys that go 6 months out to the North Sea, the Atlantic Sea, and they go like with the big cages and throw them
You know-
in. They got that big gears, that kind of plastic suit on.
There's a place in Handsworth. In Handsworth, sorry. In Handsworth.
They've discovered a new type of whale. Sorry, I saw it in the news, man. I found it fascinating.
Does it taste nice?
I was asking
Does it
something. Can I ask you something? Do you do
Go on.
this whilst you're taking sadaqah money, or do you do this in your own time when you go look at random websites to find out about whales?
Brother, I watched the news.
What news are you watching?
Listen, the brother actually mentioned something quite
Watching
interesting.
you,
I'm going to ask you guys,
Stop
you know,
watching.
because of the content you watch on YouTube, yeah? When you go on YouTube, like the suggested videos, his is obviously all Erdogan related. Mufti Saab, what's the most common thing on yours? And Altaf, what's the most common thing on yours?
Well, let me just tell you now, bro. I'm just gonna tell you. I'm just gonna read it out to you guys. What I get.
Altaf will do the same.
Yeah. Mine is most likely gonna be zikr. Yeah. Sheikh Zayd's Beyonce. Oh, page is not even opening. Okay, mine is basically loads of things. Those little snippets of BBC News. I don't know how that gets on. I didn't even watch those. It's not really true of what you watch. It's actually because they kind of like just check out whatever other things that you kind of search for on the internet. They just
And
throw
it
anything.
changes by certain times as well.
Yeah, it changes as well. So, for
So
example,
mine
look, the top line it says podcast episode number 34. Then it says Rashford scores stunner in United fight back. Then it says Sheikh Aslam very tearful. Then it says Akhi Shahrukh, I am an uncle vlog. And then it says underneath a conversation between Noah and Angel. And then it's got this Arab video on there. And then it's got the Grand Tour. A massive hunt is out. Yeah, so
I've got UFC. I got what is the best thing to dry brine your steaks with. I've got how to chop onions on the street. I got some more UFC stuff. I got MKBHD talk with Barack Obama, and I've got Undertaker versus Mankind going through the steel cage.
whoa. That's the way, bro.
I got COVID-19. Well, I don't actually have COVID-19. I've got how to cook the perfect omelette.
Is that Alex?
I've got something about the series I was watching. I won't name it because I don't want people to judge me. What else is there? And loads of comedy stuff, loads of Dave Chappelle stuff.
Nav is the guy that makes the perfect omelette. Is his name Alex?
Funnily enough, I think it might be, you know.
That guy's a genius.
Yeah, you know about the American dude, isn't it?
Have you watched that one, that 30 Ways to Make an Egg? Yeah. That's a good one.
I like watching a lot of Heston stuff, you know. I find him fascinating because he obviously takes it to the next level, innit? Well, not really, but he takes it beyond the level he needs to go to. But
the level was here, Nav. He's gone somewhere like by your house at the moment. 400 quid to eat in his restaurant.
Whoa.
Per person.
One day, inshallah.
I keep telling
I was watching Mark Pierre White, and my wife was saying, I don't like Marco. She goes, he cooks like a ganda. Like, you know, he's reckless. He doesn't look after his stuff and this and that. I was like, okay. I don't even know what that means, really. But I think some people
have you ever thought about like doing one of those, you know, those kind of videos where people make outdoors, like in the wilderness? They cook meat outdoors in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Have you thought about that?
I don't think I think I'm still learning Mufti Sahib. I don't think I'm good enough to do that kind of stuff.
It would be that interesting because we would just purchase a steak off Altafia and then just cook it in 2 minutes and the video will be done.
Do you know what?
Slow it down.
It's not 5 hours later, not 10 hours later. I say, here it is, it's done.
To be honest, I think I'm cooking this weekend. It's going to take me about 4 hours. 4 hours to cook a turkey. But
From beginning to end.
The whole process is going to take me probably a day and a half or 2 days.
Whoa.
So I'll start tomorrow.
I showed you some pictures, didn't I, man?
Yeah, man. I was impressed enough.
So am I as well. I'm going to try something else now. I might try beef Wellington like you did.
Yeah, I think you could do it. But mine was amazing. But the amount of comments I got on that when I put it on a group, oh my gosh. So I tagged Yahya in as a joke and I just wrote in there, Yahya, is this halal? Because it was still medium rare.
Yeah.
And people thought I was asking them about their Islamic opinion. Oh my gosh.
Oh, I think Yahya, he sent me a message. He sent me a message saying this guy saying this about the blood inside of it. That he doesn't.
It's not blood.
I just said emoji.
It's called myoglobin, right? So basically, the question was this, Mufti Sahib, is that somebody was saying that it's blood inside the meat. It's not. It's called myoglobin, so it's not even. It's red. It's tinted red, but it's more the liquid inside the meat and how it comes out. So it's it's related there. But then somebody else was saying that one of these Islamic activists was saying, oh yeah, it's haram to have this type of blood, and I was like, nah, but this blood hasn't gushed forth from the animal. Like, chill out. You're right.
All of that malarkey.
Yeah, but this was still within the animal, so it's like, it's all right, chill out. And he was like, he went off from no one, but I had like 140 comments on there. It was hilarious. Like some of the comments on there, people like thought I was really genuinely cared about their opinion.
I really like your rants that you're doing at the moment, Altaf. You know, your rant, the influencer rant, that was quite funny. And what really grinds my gears, I'm looking forward to this series, bro. You need to do that.
I'm
doing you know what it is, bro? Instagram is fine and dandy, yeah, bro. I think you need to come back to Facebook, bro. Or maybe I'm just getting old and I don't use Instagram as much.
You know, it's because most of my business stuff takes place on Instagram, innit?
Yeah.
But I'll come back and do it on Facebook. The grind my gears one is going to be about life coaches. I hate them. Can't stand them.
Life coaches.
Period. Full stop.
I personally know like 2 or 3, bro, and wallah, like it's hard to be nice to them.
He's like 23 years old, or they're 23 years old, and they're like, I can help you sort your life. I was like, you sorted your own life out. You can help me with mine.
Yeah, and the internet talking to strangers and telling me how to sort my life out.
They made me go mad. But somebody was talking about them recently. I think my wife was, and I was just like, please just don't talk about life coaches. I can't stand them. We're going to help you believe, achieve, and dream. And I was like, what are you going to do? Help me dream? You're going to give me a dream catcher or something? Like, we're going to help you focus your life. It's like, but you don't seem to have much focus in yours. So how are you going to teach me? They get me mad.
Maybe we should get one of these on later on.
Credibility.
Get a life coach.
I'm not going to come on them with stuff. I can't sit there with them. I can't take them seriously. I'm charging people for just like sitting there saying, bro, what do you want to do in your time? What's your focus? What's your inner why? It's like, chupre, man. What are you talking about? Your inner why? This lesson, they only plan 4 lessons, I reckon. because by the 5th lesson they got no content left.
It'd
So
be
what the-
interesting to get someone from a travel agency or somebody that specializes in like Umrah and Hajj to find out about the update and all of that stuff as well at some point.
Yeah, find it. Get someone there, bro. You got contacts, bro. You're there.
What
The
contacts
amount of
with
names you come out with that you know them, you've been having conversations with them, bro.
We've never seen
need to-
anybody on the show. Just putting that out there. Apart from one. It's your turn
Wow.
next.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Who do you want? Well, next
When you're
week.
back, okay,
I'll-
next week we'll call it off. The week after when you come back.
Why? What's wrong with Easter, Christmas Eve? Are you like I don't know what's up. I don't want to say anything because we're live on podcast. I was gonna say
Because you know what?
Bro, I'm gonna be in Lebanon. Yeah, I'm gonna come back muddy from a camp. Yeah, I'm gonna shower and go to sleep.
what's this up? Are you doing midnight mass? Are you preparing
Tahajjud,
presents?
bro. Tahajjud.
Is it tradition for every masjid to do a talk on Isa alayhi salam towards the Christmas time?
Oh, but again, I'm doing a talk on Isa alayhi salam. Yeah, anyone wants to join? It's gonna be in Quranic Insights, Abdul Hay's website. Quranic Insights. It's gonna be about Isa alayhi salam. It's gonna be Saturday, this Saturday, inshallah. I think it's 5 to 8. Free of charge. It's free. You can join.
Free.
All
Well, I
right,
think we
we'll
should
call you a
come
day.
off tonight now.
All right, guys. Take care, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.